What was the guilty pleasure, intimate encounter you enjoyed, but would never tell the people close to you about? Story 1. When I was 21 and living in my first apartment, my girlfriend would come over frequently. Since I lived alone and didn't have dorm mates or family around, we had complete privacy, and things often got a little wild. I'm talking about our loud smushing sessions with the headboard banging against the wall and my girlfriend screaming. It was one of the first times we could really let loose like that. My neighbor downstairs ended up filing a noise complaint and even called the police, who came and gave me a loud knock on my door. I definitely didn't want that happening again, so later that day I wrote an apology note with my number on it, offering that if we ever got too loud again, she could just text or call and let us know. My girlfriend thought it was a good idea too. The next night she texted me, and we had a good laugh about the situation, throwing in some flirty banter about how I must really know how to handle things in the bedroom. We formally introduced ourselves, and I found out she was 29. About a week later, she reached out, asking how I planned to make it up to her for causing her to lose so much sleep. Honestly, the tension was starting to make me even more curious. One day, I decided to go downstairs and see if she was actually interested. Sure enough, we smoked a blunt, and things escalated from there. It felt like I was living out my girl next door fantasy. My girlfriend never found out. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. One time I met a girl off Tinder, and admittedly she wasn't the best looking, but neither am I. You know, take what you can get sort of thing. We met at a bar, and we were out drinking, and things were going great. It was getting late, so she invited me back to her place to keep drinking. I accepted because I've never scored with a chick on the night we met. Anyways, to make a long story short, we went to the bedroom and things were getting hot and heavy when I stuck my hands down, only to find a big juicy dong. It was bigger than mine. I didn't know what to do since I don't like conflict, so I did what any drunk man would do and blew it, then let him bang me with it. I'm not gay or anything, but I was a guest in her house. So, yay, I agree. If I had known she had a dong, I wouldn't have met up. Story 3. A group of my old coworkers and I decided to head out to a bar in Hollywood. I invited a female coworker who was known for her casual hookups. She made it clear up front that she wasn't interested in anything with me, even though I wasn't exactly opposed if it happened, but I wasn't going to push for it. She said she'd be bringing her cousin along, so I suggested we meet up at my place first since it was on the way and had free parking. She agreed. A few hours later, they showed up, and we had a couple of shots before calling a lift to head to the bar. My coworker wasted no time and started binge drinking. Soon she was all over me at the bar in front of our coworkers. I tried to push her away politely, not wanting any rumors to start, but honestly, I wasn't entirely opposed to the attention. Fast forward a few hours to about 1 a.m., and we ended up at another coworker's house in Hollywood. At this point, my coworker was pretty drunk, but I had been pacing myself, so I was still pretty aware of everything. Her cousin suggested we go back to my place since neither of them could drive, and I offered my couch for the night. We said our goodbyes and caught a lift back to my apartment. Once we were back, I took them to the kitchen to grab some water, but when I turned around, both of them were just standing there staring at me. My drunk coworker then asked, "Who's it going to be?" I was completely caught off guard. Turns out, the cousin had been into me, but hadn't given me any signs. While she was cute, my coworker was definitely more my type. So I apologized, grabbed my coworker, and led her upstairs. Once we were alone, I asked her, "Are you sure you want to do this?" She says yes, and we go ahead with it. But about 10 minutes in, she suddenly yells, "Stop," and I panic, jumping up right away. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me she doesn't want to continue. I check if she's okay, and if she's sure, and she reassures me she's fine. She just didn't want to do it anymore. It was a bit uncomfortable, but I respected her decision, of course. I'm lying there next to her, still feeling charged while she's passed out beside me. And then I start wondering, what if I go downstairs to the cousin? Feeling bold, I decided to go for it and made my way down. She was still awake, so I straightforwardly asked if she wanted to go for it. She asked what happened with her cousin, and I told her the truth. She said I couldn't tell her cousin, my coworker, about what was about to happen, and I agreed without hesitation. Within just a few minutes of stopping with one cousin, I was starting things with the other, with no protection whatsoever. Did I have a great time? Yes. STIs? None. Am I ever going to hook up with two chicks within minutes of each other for the rest of my life? No. Was it trashy? Yes. Would I ever tell anybody? Only strangers on the internet. Story 4. I was fortunate enough to have a few interesting experiences, but this one stands out. I met a really sweet girl on a dating app. I'd only seen one picture of her, just her upper body. But she looked great. We decided to meet at a bar, and when I got there, I found out she was from Brazil. She was incredibly cute and stunning, just turned 20. I was 28, and stood at just 4'5". I noticed right away because her feet didn't touch the ground while she was sitting waiting for me. When we stood up later, I couldn't help but notice the intense stares from other guys, jealousy written all over their faces. After a while, she invited me for one last drink, saying her parents weren't home. When I arrived, she pointed out that her 18-year-old sister, who wasn't as petite as her, was also there, probably just back from a party. Sure enough, that was the case. We ended up having a drink together, the three of us, and while chatting about random topics with her sister, and all of a sudden, she gets down and proceeds to give me a blowy. I went silent from the surprise, her sister too, for a second, but with a weird smile at me, and she also gets on her knees and yay. The night was long, weird, and hot, you can guess. I stayed the night, and it was unforgettable. The next morning, her parents came back around 8 o'clock with a big breakfast ready. That was the start of a wild, intense 3-year relationship with these two sisters from hell. Story 5. When I was 23, I had a fling with a fun and cute 38-year-old woman I met at a bar. We hit it off quickly, and despite the fact that I was pretty drunk, we ended up having a surprisingly good time together. In the morning, she was a bit melancholy and cried a little as I held her. She said that she had always wanted to be a mother, but had wasted all her best years on bad relationships that went nowhere, and now it was very unlikely she'd meet someone in time to have kids. In a moment of naive madness, I offered to do it with her without protection, and to my huge surprise, she actually took me up on it. Before I had time to second-guess anything, things escalated quickly, and I followed through. I think about her from time to time, and wonder if I have a kid out there somewhere. Want to know the real kicker? I couldn't remember her name in the morning, and I was too embarrassed to ask, so there's no way of looking her up, so I guess I'll never know unless the kid comes knocking. Story 6. I once went to Chicago for a distant relative's wedding, something like a second cousin once removed, but I completely botched the dates and showed up 2 days early. I didn't know anyone in the city, at least as far as I knew, and my side of the family was all based in New York. It was the bride who had Chicago roots. So with time to kill, I did the tourist thing, checked out the museums, wandered the streets, soaked in the vibe. Gotta say, Chicago is a fantastic city when you're not in a rush. By my second night Thursday, I was bored out of my mind, so I called up a client back in New York who spent a lot of time in Chicago. He worked in finance, something to do with the mercantile markets. Fun side note, he worked for Bear Stearns, and we all know how that turned out a few years later. Anyway, he pointed me toward a particular neighborhood and suggested a specific bar. Names escape me now, but he said it was a reliable spot for meeting people. So I took his advice and ended up at this upscale Irish-style bar, not unlike the kind you'd find all over Manhattan. I had a few drinks, felt a good buzz going, not blackout Giuliani style, just pleasantly tipsy. I was 32 at the time. Sitting nearby were two older women, probably late 40s or early 50s. I struck up a conversation, using my wedding mishap story as an opener, and it turned out they were from a more rural area outside the city, in town for some shopping and apparently whatever fun they could find. One of them was curvier. The other was tall and rail thin, definitely a runner. Somehow I hit it off with the runner. Her friend ended up chatting with a guy closer to their age who swooped in not long after. Fast forward, the runner and I went back to my hotel. We hooked up for hours. She knew what she was doing. Older women really can teach you a thing or two. She told me she preferred younger guys, said our recovery time isn't measured in hours. I took that as a compliment. The next morning, as she was getting dressed, there was a knock at the door. It was her friend. Apparently the other guy had fizzled out early and she'd gone back to their hotel. The runner had texted her to come by. They crossed paths, runner lady left, and I ended up spending a few more hours with her friend. Oh, to be 32 again. Story 7. Well, recently I gave a blowy to a car salesman in one of the models in broad daylight. For anyone that wants the details, I had just gone in for an oil and filter change, and about an hour into the service, one of the car salesmen came over to the snack bar where I was sitting. He introduced himself and asked what I was there for, not a car, by the way. We started chatting, and I'll admit, I was being a little flirtatious. He suggested showing me a couple of cars, and since I knew from talking to the mechanic that I'd be there for a while, I agreed. Test driving some cool cars sounded like a fun way to pass the time, so we hit the road. During the drive, I mentioned that I had recently taken a self-defense class and joked about how I had some bruises from sparring. We started talking more about the class, and I told him that one thing they taught us was how to escape a chokehold. I playfully added, honestly, my first thought during training was, this wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. I flashed him a mischievous look to match the tone. Afterwards, he wanted to show me other cars, and he climbed into the back seat of one with me. He kept turning to look out the back window, so I asked if he was okay. He said he had to make sure no one at the shop right behind us was getting the wrong impression by seeing us in the car together. I shrugged at him, looked out the back window and said, "Are you worried? You shouldn't be. I can hide your dong pretty well." He looked at me for a second and goes, "How well?" he said as he got comfortable and, well, he was blown. Story 8. I was stationed in Guam about 20 years ago. After me and a friend ate some great Jamaican food and got drunk, we thought it'd be fun to get a massage with many places nearby. I had never had a massage before and assumed you'd take off all your clothes. Apparently, that sent a particular message to the therapist. She was an older Asian woman who seemed like she was the business owner. Drunk and charged from not getting any for 3 months. I didn't object when she asked me to roll onto my back and started exploring other areas. She asked if I had $40, and I told her I did. Soon she covered her hands in baby oil and started to slowly and thoroughly massage me, all of me, especially the center of me. Other than focusing on what she was doing, she just kept telling me how I was a cute boy with a cute dong. After I was finished, I quickly paid, and my friend and I left. He had only taken his shift off and only ended up getting a back rub. He was bummed he didn't get the same extra treatment I did. I felt guilty and dirty about it later. Not something I would ever do again. It felt good, but not a great. Story 9. After my ex and I broke up, I found out she'd been cheating on me. Not long after, I ran into her best friend at a bar. She already knew about the breakup and casually asked if I was aware of the cheating. Before I could even respond, she shrugged and said, "You know what? Who cares then?" Grabbed my arm and led me to her car. We ended up at my place, and let's just say things escalated quickly. We spent nearly every night together for the next month, then mutually drifted back into being just friends. The wildest part, everyone we knew, including mutual friends, and even my ex, still has no clue. As far as I know, they're still best friends to this day. Another one was when I was in high school. I dated a girl who was a couple years older than me. She lived nearby with 2 roommates, and once a month they'd host casual movie nights. We'd usually grab a blanket and claim a spot on the couch. She liked being the little spoon. Sometimes, things would heat up quietly. If she felt me getting a little too excited, she'd sigh and mutter something like, "Ugh, move over, I want some room too," while subtly adjusting her position. What no one could see under the blanket was us getting a little too cozy. From the outside, it just looked like we were adjusting to get comfortable. No one ever suspected a thing. Story 10. When I had just turned 18, I ended up sleeping with a coworker who was in her early 50s. One evening, she mentioned having a migraine, so our boss told her to head home early. Since my shift was almost over anyway, he told me to clock out and drive her home. When we got to her place, she invited me in, and we ended up half watching some forgettable movie on Netflix. After a while, she sat down in front of me, and it was pretty clear where things were heading. We eventually made our way to the bedroom. She kept asking me what I'd tell my friends about hooking up with an older woman, almost like it turned her on to imagine it. We ended up smushing and smashing for quite a while. Looking back now, I realized that migraine was probably just a line. I drove a ridiculously loud car, and she didn't flinch once. Story 11. Back in high school, I was dating this girl who had a rebellious streak. One afternoon, we were at her house just hanging out. Her mom was in the same room, sitting at the computer with her back to us, fully focused on whatever she was working on. My girlfriend and I were cuddled up on the couch under a big blanket, pretending to watch TV. Well, things started getting a little more intense under that blanket. Next thing I know, she's going for it. All while her mom is just a few feet away, totally unaware. I was frozen between pure panic and adrenaline-fueled thrill. It was one of those moments that felt insane and reckless at the time, but also weirdly unforgettable. I've been chasing that exact mix of fear and excitement for the past 20 years. Story 12. Met up with a girl off Match.com. She wasn't super attractive but had an awesome personality and was just an overall adventurous person. We clicked after talking for a few days and decided to meet up for dinner. Needless to say, dinner went well, and we quickly went back to her place. Things were getting hot and heavy quickly, but it was obvious that something was bothering her because any attempts to remove clothing kept being put off. I asked her if something was wrong and she had this odd, embarrassed look on her face. After a silence that felt like it would never end while she was attempting to tell me what was up, she blurted out that she didn't shave and was afraid I'd be turned off. I love a great bush, so naturally I told her that I was very much into it and she had nothing to be worried about. I definitely wasn't prepared when she took off her shirt and had the thickest armpit hair I had ever seen and a treasure trail bigger than mine. The bush exploded out of her inners and her legs were coated with a thick, soft, dark pelt from her thighs down to her ankles. My stiffy at that point could have supported the Empire State Building. At that point, reality was starting to collapse around me, and I was drunk with lust. We banged for almost 5 hours straight, until we were both so dehydrated and sore that we could barely function. Our relationship lasted a year before she had to move across the country to take care of a family member. We tried the long-distance thing, but it became too costly and unmanageable after a few months. We lost touch after a while, but that experience flipped a switch in me. I can no longer date anyone who shaves. It basically destroyed dating for me, but that feeling of being with a truly hairy woman is indescribable and I could never go back. Story 13. I was approached by a massage therapist on a dating site. He offered to pay me $500 for a special massage. The only details he offered was that it would be at his public massage parlor. I would need to be fully bare, and there would be no dong stuff, just handwork. I'm not exactly sure what came over me, or why I accepted, probably because I really needed that $500, and it seemed like easy work, but I cannot even lie, as bizarre of an experience as it was hands down the most exciting thing I've ever experienced in my life. He made me reach the finish line multiple times. He wasn't even attractive, just some average-looking older man. I have never told a soul. This is my first time speaking about it. To be quite honest, I have never experienced gratification on that level ever since. To be even more honest, I really don't give a crap what anyone thinks anymore. Story 14. I was stationed in Korea at the time. One random night, a few of us headed downtown to our usual dance club. That's when I spotted this tall girl with jet black hair and pale skin. She definitely stood out. I decided to shoot my shot, and to my surprise, she was into it. We ended up finding one of those hourly hotel rooms and smashed. It was solid, though not exactly mind-blowing. Afterward, we left, swapped numbers, and went our separate ways. On my way back to the club to rejoin my friends, I spotted the girl from our unit, the one everyone had a crush on, standing by a street food stand. I went over to say hey, and she invited me to join her. We ended up having a great conversation over some surprisingly good food. I walked her back to the club, only to find my crew had already moved on. She convinced me to stay and dance with her. Why not? One thing led to another, and soon we were basically onto each other on the dance floor for a couple of hours. The chemistry was insane. Eventually, we headed back to the same hourly hotel I had literally just left. The woman at the front desk gave me a death glare but didn't say a word. What followed was easily some of the wildest, most intense smushing I'd ever had. I was absolutely spent. The next morning, I woke up and she was already gone. A few days later at work, we saw each other and acted like nothing had ever happened. No drama, no awkwardness, just a crazy night locked away between us. Oh, and yeah, banging her on top of an airplane was also awesome. Story 15. I've been hooking up with a woman from another department at the hospital where I work. It started casually, But it's gotten to the point where, if we're alone for more than 2 seconds, clothes are coming off, no exaggeration. The wild part? My office is connected to one of the busier parts of the hospital, so the stakes are always high. We've managed to keep it quiet, but it definitely adds a layer of intensity. She comes over to my place now and then too. But to be honest, outside of our insane physical chemistry, we don't have much in common. Still, that hasn't stopped us from making the most of it whenever we get the chance. Story 16. One day I was asked to pick up a new colleague at the office and take her to a location for work. She was an 18-year-old girl that had just arrived in the country. She was incredibly beautiful and charming and funny, but at the time I was 25, so we family zoned each other, brother and sister. Her very religious parents had sent her back to her home country because she got a boyfriend, so now she lived with her grandparents and had to wait until she was 19 before she could start her own life. I helped her a lot in the next few months to get her life together, get a grip on her finances, figure out what she wanted education-wise, look for houses, etc. She was, and honestly still is, probably the most amazing person I'd ever met. She was funny and intelligent and humble, and just that tiny bit of Thatcherite naughtiness. Classy, interested, very wise for her age. We spend more and more time together. We celebrated her 19th birthday with a bunch of people. We decorated her first house. I hid funny pictures of myself all over the house, so weeks later she kept finding my face when she opened a book or a cabinet. Thinking about it now, it was probably one of the best times of my life. Story 17. I met a girl at a speed dating event, and we hit it off, so I emailed her asking her out. Then I decided to Google her and discovered we had drastically different political views. She was a young female scientist, and I assumed she'd share my democratic views. Turns out she was a hardcore MAGA supporter. I probably wouldn't have asked her out if I had known that up front, but I'd already asked, and she said yes. So I went on the date, figuring it would be good for my dating experience as a recent divorcee. What I didn't expect was how much crazier things got. She believed civilizations were being wiped out by cartels because they discovered free energy, and that NASA was kidnapping people and sending them to Mars for slave labor. She even thought Star Trek and Star Wars weren't just fictional stories but actual documentaries. Yeah, completely insane. I knew I'd never see her again, but then when I kissed her goodnight, sparks flew in a way I'd never felt before. I'm 40, so it's not like I haven't kissed anyone, but this was on a whole new level, and we hooked up right there in the parking lot. At like 8 p.m., it was wild. I couldn't stop myself. I kept seeing her over the next month, whenever I could. It was incredibly hot every single time, but afterward I'd tell myself I couldn't keep doing it. She was crazy, and then I'd go back to her again. I finally ended things after about 5 weeks. A week later, I tried to get her back, but thankfully she was too offended that I'd broken up with her and refused to meet me again. That helped me break free from the spell. But now, nothing has been the same since. Sure, we had fun and connected, but it wasn't set like that time with the Mars kidnapping woman. Story 18. When I was 18, I was working labor construction just outside downtown Vancouver at a busy intersection. I'd always get there early, starting my day mixing mud for the bricklayers. The mixer was tucked off to the side but still close to the sidewalk. Every weekday morning there was this stunning woman who'd walk by and smile at me. It became a routine. Monday to Thursday she'd pass by in tight pants or a fitted skirt. We'd exchange a smile or a quick hello. She was curvy, had shoulder-length light brown hair, and just had this undeniable presence about her. She quickly became the highlight of my day. During my hour-long commute, all I'd think about was her. I kept telling myself, today's the day I'll stop her and say something more than just hello. But I had to be careful. This was summer, and the rules at the site were clear. Any inappropriate behavior could get me thrown off for good. And although there were plenty of attractive women walking by, she was the one I couldn't stop thinking about. As summer was winding down, and my last week at the site approached, college was starting the following week. I knew I had to make a move. It was now or never. That Monday morning, it was foggy during my commute, but I hyped myself up, telling myself, today's the day. I went through my usual routine, but the closer it got to the time when she would walk by, the more nervous I became. My heart was racing. And then, she didn't show up. I couldn't believe it. For 2 months, she'd walked by without fail, but today of all days, she was nowhere to be seen. My Monday was completely thrown off, and I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. The next morning, I went through my day a bit less nervous but still hoping for the best. And then there she was. I saw her walking towards me. In a panic, I ripped off my hard hat, splashed a little water in my hair to make it look like I'd been sweating, and tried to act casual. She smiled and greeted me as she walked by, and my heart felt like it was going to burst. She kept walking, but I followed her. As she turned the corner, I called out, "Hey." She stopped, smiled, but looked a little surprised. I was in it now, no turning back. I noticed she walked by every day, so I decided to ask her name. She smiled and said it was Trish, and I introduced myself. I felt a bit nervous, my voice cracking slightly, but her warm smile helped calm me down. I told her I'd love to get to know her better and suggested we grab lunch over the weekend. She agreed, saying that sounded great. Honestly, it felt like the best day ever. Although I had been active in the past, I'd never felt my heart race the way it did with Trish. I quickly saved her number on my phone. On Friday, I called her, and she invited me to pick her up Saturday morning. It seemed a little early, around 9:30, but I didn't give it much thought. When I arrived at her townhouse and knocked on the door, she opened it, wearing jean shorts and a black tank top. My God, she was beautiful. I started getting a stiffy and was losing my mind. She asked me to sit at the dining table, and then joined me, sitting down next to me. With a smile, she asked, "So what do you want to do?" I replied with something like, "Whatever you'd like." She smiled again and reached for my hand and started making out with me. The first time we banged, I may have lasted a minute, but we did it multiple times all morning. Anyways, we ended up hooking up for months. The crazy thing was that she was married and had kids. She was 38 at that time and her husband worked in the Yukon. We would fool around in her bed, on her husband's pool table, and wherever else. She never seemed like she was remorseful. Her husband worked 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and initially we would do it only when he was gone. She got more and more brazen though, would call me and tell me to come over. She would tell her husband she's going out for a bit. I'd pick her up and we would go find a quiet place to park my truck and do our thing. This lasted for a few months until she decided to end things, claiming she felt guilty. Honestly, it seemed insincere. She didn't care about her husband, and I think he suspected she was being unfaithful. To this day, she remains one of the best experiences I've had. It's a story I've shared with many of my friends, but my wife doesn't know. Sometimes I still think about her, how she used to take control, the way she made me feel. It was a kind of bliss. After that, my confidence with women grew. I found myself seeking out situations like that, enjoying being desired and exploring relationships with married women. Of course, as I got older, things shifted, but that period of my life was something else. Story 19. This one's a bit strange, and there's a long backstory to set it up. A few years ago, I moved to Oregon, and after a few months, I lost all my IDs while trying to find a new apartment. That left me stuck, unable to move anywhere, and I ended up homeless. I made friends with a group of homeless people who had a camp outside of town, including a couple who would come and go. I had known the guy for a while, but one day I was hanging out with him, his girlfriend, and two other guys. For reasons I'd rather not get into since it's still just speculation, I was suddenly jumped by the boyfriend and the two other guys. To add to the confusion and paranoia of not knowing who I could trust, I had also lost my last pair of contacts. That's when this other guy, a heavier-set black dude, basically kept me company. And now we're getting to the interesting part of the story. One day, we happened to be walking past the Mission, a Christian place where homeless people can get help, as people were leaving after lunch. Among them was the couple, and they came up to confront me and my friend, with a crowd starting to gather around. As my friend was getting in the boyfriend's face, the girlfriend came up, threw her bike at me and started talking trash. This girl was maybe 5'5" and weighed about 110 pounds, but she was stunning and had been in the military. Suddenly, I saw her cock her arm back and swing at me. I'll never forget the crunch of my cheekbone, and everything slowed down as I saw stars in broad daylight. That was the most devastating punch I've ever taken, and I've been hit by some pretty burly guys. After that, they terrorized me for a while. I didn't have a home, obviously, and I didn't want to camp with those people outside of town, especially since campsites are notoriously dangerous and they'd been raided by cops multiple times. For about 2 months, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, but eventually they disappeared. Fast forward to a few months later, in November, I was walking through the VA campus, which takes up about half the town, when I heard a girl call out my name. She said, "Is that you? It's me. Remember?" It was dark, so I had trouble recognizing her, but as she got closer, I realized it was the girlfriend. She had become way more attractive, and she came up, hugged me, and apologized for everything that had happened. We ended up going to a food truck for some tacos, and as it got cold, I told her my friend had helped me get set up at a long-term stay hotel, so I invited her to come back to my place. So we get back to my place, break out the party favors, and start getting completely hammered. Things quickly turn flirtatious and heated, and at one point, I get up to grab some sodas for us. As I walk back to hand hers to her, she stands up and kisses me. I'm usually a pretty shy, introverted person, but something clicked in my mind, and I kissed her back and proceeded to have the best banging of my life. We kept going for about 6 hours straight until morning. Eventually, I told her I had to leave, and after that I lost contact with her. Story 20. Looking back, one of the wildest guilty pleasure moments I've ever had was hooking up with my high school bully's older brother in her basement. We weren't close or anything. He was just one of those older guys you saw around, and I never thought much of him. But years later, we randomly crossed paths at a get-together. We started talking, and next thing I know, we're laughing, flirting, and somehow ending up back at his place, which, yes, he still shared with his little sister, my former bully. The kicker? She and I have the same first name. So imagine the awkward tension in that house afterward, when my name started coming up in conversation again. I didn't stick around to witness the fallout, but the thought of how uncomfortable that must have been for her. Not gonna lie, it made the whole experience that much more satisfying. We never talked about it after that night, and I kept it to myself ever since. But it's one of those memories that lives rent-free in my head. Story 21. So, this one's definitely my weirdest guilty pleasure story, and I've never told anyone in my real life about it. I lost my virginity at a funeral. With a living person, I should clarify. I was 18, and it was my grandmother's funeral. My partner from college had come with me for support, and emotions were high. Grief, nostalgia, weird life, perspective kind of stuff. We ended up slipping away to a quiet office in the building. I still don't know if it belonged to a funeral director or staff member, but sorry in advance to whoever's space we accidentally borrowed. Looking back, it was definitely not the time or place, but it kind of set the tone for how unpredictable my life would be. Bonus. I sometimes joke that it gave me goth icon energy. Like, am I Mary Shelley now? I don't know. But yeah, that one's staying off the family group chat forever. Story 22. When I was 19, I had this rebellious streak and decided to do something totally out of character. I paid for an escort. Her name was Lulu Divine, and let's just say she had like ridiculously large implants. After spending some time together, we ended up taking a random trip to Big Lots. I don't even remember why, maybe snacks or something totally mundane. And as fate would have it, while we're walking through the parking lot, who do I see pulling in? My parents. My mom was mortified. Story 23. So, I travel a lot for work, and one of my favorite ways to unwind is hitting up the sauna at whatever hotel I'm staying in. Just a routine thing. Steam, relax, reset. Well, one time I was in Amsterdam, and the hotel I was booked into didn't have a spa or sauna. No big deal. I figured I'd just Google one nearby. I found a gay sauna just 2 streets over, looked decent enough, so I went. What I didn't realize until I got there was that it was a very specific kind of sauna. Let's just say it wasn't the kind where people sit around in silence and sip cucumber water. It was a full-on gay sauna, open encounters, dark rooms, the whole 9 yards. I was honestly stunned walking through it. I didn't know where to look or what to do. At some point, I ended up in a dark room packed with people. I kept feeling hands brushing against me, and then before I fully processed what was happening, my towel was gone and, yeah, things escalated. Let's just say I had an experience, a very intense one. That was the first and only time I explored anything like that, but it left a weird little imprint. Ever since, I can't, well, reach the big O unless there's some kind of attention on my chest. It has become a thing, and I never saw that one coming. Still haven't told a soul, not because I'm ashamed, just because I know exactly how that conversation would go, and I am not ready for that dinner table awkwardness. Story 24. A couple years after breaking up with my ex, I was out with my cousin, hungover, and just looking for some greasy food to soak up the night before. We randomly chose a Jack in the Box, totally on a whim, and as we're walking in, I see someone who looks really familiar. It's my ex's aunt. We hadn't seen each other since way back when I was still dating her niece, but we always got along, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed how attractive she was. We struck up a conversation, caught up a little bit, and after a few minutes I told my cousin to head home without me. Turns out she had hit a rough patch. She was kicked out of her mom's house, lost her job as an optometrist's assistant, became an escort, and was living in a motel nearby. She invited me over, and we ended up spending a good 30 minutes just talking, reminiscing and laughing. We both used to be pothead, so we bonded over that again, and then I mentioned I knew where to get Molly. One thing led to another, and well, the night definitely took a turn. It was impulsive, chaotic, and completely unexpected, but I've got zero regrets. We never saw each other again after that night, and honestly, that's probably for the best. Still, every time I drive past a Jack in the Box now, I get a weird little flashback and just shake my head like, yeah. Story 25. When I was 23, I worked with this incredibly attractive boss who was in her 40s. She was fun, outgoing, and always made work feel a little less stressful. One day she invited a few of us over to watch a football game at her house. We were all just hanging out, chatting, and enjoying the game. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as the night went on, I ended up being one of the last people there. The vibe was casual until, out of nowhere, her husband decided to put on Pour Some Sugar on Me's by Def Leppard, which for whatever reason completely changed the energy in the room. To make a long story short, we ended up having a three-score, with her husband me taking turns all night long. It led to us doing it a few times a week for months. It was amazing. I hope they are both still happy. Story 26. Back in my senior year, I was at a sleepover with a close group of friends. You know, the usual setup, snacks, movies, gossip, and way too much sugar. At one point in the night, everyone had finally crashed in the next room, and it was just me and one of my closest friends still awake, talking quietly and catching up. The conversation somehow shifted to relationships and dating, and she mentioned, a bit frustrated, that no one had ever tasted her pie. She said it like it was just another fun fact, but it stuck with me. I remember thinking, well, I mean, that's kind of an easy problem to solve, isn't it? There was this long pause, and the next thing I knew, we weren't just talking anymore. It wasn't planned, it wasn't romantic. More like a spontaneous, why not, moment. The whole thing happened quietly, with our friends asleep just a few feet away in the next room. We never told anyone in the group, and honestly, we never even brought it up again between the two of us. Story 27. There was one time I was hooking up with this woman, and things were already feeling adventurous. At one point, she asked me to join her in the shower. Nothing too unusual there, until she looked at me and told me to sit down. I didn't really question it, I just did what she said. What happened next completely caught me off guard. Let's just say it was way outside the usual playbook involving golden shower, but for some reason it hit this weird nerve in my brain. That combination of surprise, vulnerability, and adrenaline, and boom, that was it. It was so unexpected and strange, but I had the big O right away. Another time I was in Lake Tahoe on a little trip with some friends. We were renting a house near the lake, just enjoying a few days of freedom and snow. One night I ended up meeting this gorgeous redhead, total free spirit type. We hit it off right away and brought her back to the house. Next thing I know, we're in the hot tub, clothes nowhere in sight, the steam rising, and she's got this playful look in her eyes. Things got intense, fast. She ended up spending the night doing all kinds of things with me. I flew back home the next morning and never saw her again. I can't even remember her name. Story 28. A few years back, I broke up with my girlfriend after a pretty long relationship. It wasn't a messy breakup, but it wasn't exactly mutual either. I was still pretty hurt, even if I didn't show it. We had history, shared friend groups. Her family knew me well. That kind of breakup sticks with you for a bit. Less than a week later, I ran into her sister at a small get-together. Nothing big, just a few mutual friends hanging out. We started talking more than we ever had before, probably because we both had this weird shared connection through the breakup. It felt easy, comfortable, and honestly, kind of intense. One thing led to another, and we ended up back at her place. I'm not going to pretend it was some big emotional moment or some revenge move. It wasn't that. It was two people caught in a moment, both probably feeling a little too much and thinking a little too little. It only happened once. We never talked about it again. As far as I know, no one else ever found out. It's not something I'm proud of. Definitely one of those, what was I thinking memories. But at the same time, I don't regret it either. It was real. It happened. And it stayed between us. Story 29. This happened a few years ago, and I still don't really know how to explain it without sounding like I made it up. But it's real. After my ex and I broke up, I kind of stayed in touch with her family. We'd been together for a while, and her mom and I always had a decent relationship. She was cool, funny, very outgoing. One night I ran into her mom at a grocery store, totally random. We started talking, ended up grabbing coffee nearby. I figured it was just a friendly catch-up, but the conversation got a little more personal than I expected. There was definitely some chemistry there, and I guess we both kind of leaned into it. Long story short, we hooked up, and then it happened a couple more times over the next few weeks. Nothing serious came of it. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't try to make it anything. It was just this weird, short-lived thing that probably shouldn't have happened, but did. I never told anyone. She didn't nest either, at least as far as I know. It's just one of those things I look back on now like, yeah, that was definitely a guilty pleasure, and definitely something I said I'll take to the grave with me. Story 30. This happened a few years ago. I was casually seeing this girl who did kids' party entertainment on weekends, clowning around, face painting, that sort of thing. One night I stopped by her place after she finished a gig. She still had her full clown makeup on, as well as the outfit. I honestly didn't think much of it at first. She was exhausted and just wanted to relax, so she didn't bother changing. We were hanging out in the living room, chatting and watching TV, and things started to get a little flirtier than I expected. It escalated quickly, and before I knew it, we were hooking up, and she was still in full clown makeup and costume. The wild part, her roommate was right there, just sitting on the couch a few feet away, watching TV in a princess costume. She had just come back from her own gig, and neither of us really acknowledged the awkwardness of the situation. I don't think the roommate even noticed what was going on. She was pretty focused on the show she was watching. I've definitely told everyone about it. Story 31. When I was 19, I met someone online who I thought was around my age. We had been chatting for a little while, and I decided to meet up with her in person. When I got to her place, I realized she was quite a bit older than I expected, probably in her 30s and much heavier than what I was expecting too. I was a bit taken aback but didn't want to be rude, so I decided to stick around for a bit and see how things went. We ended up sitting down and talking for a while, and things started getting a little more intimate. She started giving me a blowy. At first I was confused about what was happening, but I didn't want to just leave, so I kind of went along with it. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was my first time and it caught me off guard. She kept going until I had reached the finish line 3 times and begged her to stop because it was getting painful. Still the best blowy I've ever had. Story 32. So, this was a while back, and it was definitely an interesting weekend. It started on a Friday night after a night out with friends. I got a text from a girl I'd been talking to, asking if she could come over. We hung out for a while, and things got physical. To be honest, I didn't make the best decision and didn't use protection, which I later regretted but didn't really think about in the moment. The next day, around noon, she left, and my friend asked if I could help him with some moving. I hadn't even showered yet, but I went with him anyway. We went out for some food and grabbed a couple of beers. The afternoon just kind of flowed, and we ended up at a local club to hang out and relax. While we were at the club, a girl came up to me, started talking, and asked if I was planning to take her home. Long story short, she went to give me a blowy, and I stopped her saying rather sheepishly that I had been with a girl earlier, haven't showered, and that I wouldn't recommend giving me blowy. To my surprise, she didn't mind and was actually excited by the idea. We ended up getting pretty physical, and it was definitely a wild experience. Story 33. Back in my senior year of high school, I was pretty convinced my English teacher was flirting with me. At least that's how it felt to my 18-year-old brain. During the last month or so of school, she started acting differently around me, mostly smiling like she didn't with other students, leaning into me when explaining assignments and winking. It was the last day of school, and I stayed behind to help her pack up a year's worth of textbooks, novels, poetry collections, all of it, and haul them up to storage. Our high school had this old attic they used for stuff like that, and we spent a while going back and forth with boxes. Eventually, we ended up there at the same time. I was holding a box when she suddenly pushed me gently against the wall. There was this intense, unfamiliar look in her eyes, something I hadn't seen from her before. I set the box down and turned around, only to find her face just an inch from mine. For a moment, everything felt suspended. So I went with what I thought she was hinting at and gave her a soft, innocent kiss. We made out for what seemed like an hour, more like 5 minutes, and then gave me a blowy. She then winked at me and left, and I went home smiling. I saw her a couple of years later at a bar with her husband, and she gave me a big hug, then proceeded to call me by the wrong name. Haven't seen her since. Story 34. A few years ago, I had a one-night fling with a coworker. We had been working together for a while and were really close friends, always getting along well at work. One night, we decided to go shoot pool, and after a few rounds and a couple of beers, we called it a night and started heading home. We parted ways outside the bar, but I messaged her on my way back, asking if she had any plans. She replied almost immediately, asking if I wanted to come over. I didn't think twice. When I got there, we hung out, chatted, and watched some TV for a while. Eventually, things took a turn, and we ended up in her bed. I decided to go for it, and it ended up being one of the most intense experiences I've ever had. It lasted for hours, and she was fully into it. She seemed to enjoy everything, especially when I was a bit rougher. Afterward, she told me it had been over a year since she'd had physical relations, and I was the first person to make her happy during that time. We agreed it would be a one-time thing because she didn't want it to affect our friendship, and we've kept things casual since. We still work together, and every now and then we exchange sly glances or joking comments about that night. We've even joked about what we'd do if it ever happened again, but now we're both in happy separate relationships, so I don't see it happening. Story 35. My ex's best friend's sister. Yeah, let that sink in for a sec. She always gave me these looks at family parties and get-togethers. We ended up going to the same college, and shortly after my ex and I broke up, we ran into each other. She took me to this old, abandoned dance room on campus. She wasn't exactly my type, but it had been a while since I'd had any action, so we started making out. I drove there, she didn't, and later she suggested I pick her up. I knew what was about to happen, and yeah, she was a little on the thicker side, but hey, it's college. We were just looking to have some fun. So I pick her up and we park in a dark street and start doing it. She starts by giving me a blowy, and it's the sloppiest one I've ever gotten. We then had a wild banging session, and then she tells me I have to drop her off at her parents' place. She walks into her house, legs trembling, hair tousled, and eyes red as if she'd smoked a whole blunt on her own. As I sit there processing everything that just happened, my ex pulls up, not noticing me, and heads inside. Later, she texts me saying she is sore and mentions that my ex asked her what happened. She replies, "I hooked up with some guy." My ex responds, "That's awesome." To this day, my ex has no idea. We ended up hooking up a few more times after that. Story 36. At the time, my girlfriend and I were in a long-distance relationship, and I was preparing to break up with her. She wasn't putting in the same effort as me, and I just couldn't keep feeling undesired and unloved anymore. Around that period, I was mainly using Tinder to help my friends meet girls. I was their wingman, and surprisingly, I was pretty good at it, especially considering my friends weren't exactly the best looking. Eventually, I made my own Tinder account and ended up getting my first blowy outside of a Wendy's. I was terrified, but it felt like exactly what I needed to fully move on. When I got home, I called my girlfriend, now ex, to break up with her. We started talking, and I choked. I stayed with her for another year, but I didn't confess the affair until 6 months later. After that year, we eventually ended things, but I always had a suspicion that my best friend and she had been smashing it behind my back. It made sense because our breakup happened just a month before I planned to propose. It was my first breakup, and it messed me up pretty badly. I struggled with alcohol and drugs for a while, but eventually I recovered and became a different man. I got what I deserved, but I learned a lot from it and have matured significantly since then. I'm now happily married in a monogamous relationship, and I spend every moment with the woman of my dreams. I have no desire to be with anyone else and feel zero temptation, now or ever. People can change, and yeah, at the time I was frustrated and craving the love I wasn't getting. Looking back, I don't regret anything. Everything that happened was necessary for me to learn my lesson and grow as a person. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.